I spent 7 nights in that place. 7. Saying it out loud now, it sounds small. A week. The kind of time that usually passes without leaving a mark. But back then, every night felt longer than the last, like time itself learned how to stretch inside that building just to keep me there. Watching. Waiting. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 34 years old when I took the night security assignment at the Ravenport Industrial Complex. It wasn't my first graveyard shift. I'd worked empty office buildings, quiet warehouses during holiday shutdowns, half-finished construction sites where nothing moved except plastic sheets in the wind. The night never scared me. I always thought of it as manageable silence. As long as you stayed alert, nothing happened. That's what I believed. Ravenport sat on the industrial edge of a mid-sized city that never quite recovered from losing its factories. During the day, the place was alive with trucks, forklifts, radios crackling, people moving fast and not looking at each other. At night, after 10, it turned into something else entirely. A spread-out maze of dark buildings, wide, empty yards, and emergency lights spaced just far enough apart to leave pockets of shadow in between. My assignment wasn't patrol, it was fixed post, security room. When they told me that, I thought I'd lucked out. Less walking, less cold, less chance of running into someone who didn't belong there. Nobody bothered to describe the room itself. That should have bothered me. On the first night, a day shift supervisor named Mark walked me down. We didn't use the main entrance. He took me through a side door and down a narrow concrete stairwell that smelled like dust and old water. The door at the bottom was metal, heavy, with chipped paint around the handle. Before opening it, he hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough to notice. "If anything comes up," he said, already pushing the door open, "call it in on the radio." The room was underground. Small. No windows. The ceiling was low enough that I felt it without thinking about it. 2 old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering at an uneven pace that made my eyes ache if I focused on it too long. The air was warm and dry, thick with the smell of heated dust and aging plastic. Along the front wall sat a makeshift console holding a row of monitors, some old CRTs with curved glass, some flat screens that clearly didn't belong with the rest. Nothing matched. Cables spilled down behind the desk like roots and disappeared into open floor ducts. "The system's kind of a mess," Mark said. "Old cameras, newer ones, some nobody remembers installing, but it works, mostly." He pointed to a notebook on the desk. "Log anything weird, doors, motion, outages, and if a camera freezes..." He paused, just long enough. "Don't try to reset it, just keep watching. It usually comes back." I nodded, even though that made no sense. He handed me the radio, the temporary badge, and left without another word. The door closed behind him with a heavy final sound. I was alone with the hum of the monitors. The routine was simple. Watch the screens. Write down timestamps. Respond to alerts if they came up. Most cameras showed empty yards, long corridors, closed loading bays. Nothing moved, nothing changed. The first 2 nights passed like that. Boredom, bad coffee, a wall clock that never seemed accurate. But even on the first night, I noticed something I couldn't quite explain. One camera, labeled C17, showed a narrow corridor lit by harsh white light. No movement, ever, no static, no flicker. The image looked more like a photograph than a live feed. I stared at it for a while, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. When I stood up to get coffee, I glanced back at the screen and thought the light looked colder, sharper. I blinked, and it was normal again. I ignored it. On the second night, I noticed the sound in the room changed depending on where I stood. Near the desk, the monitors hummed quietly. Near the back wall, there was a single dull knock coming from somewhere behind the ventilation ducts. Always the same sound. One tap, careful, deliberate. By the third night, something changed. Around 2 in the morning, the C17 camera adjusted on its own, just slightly. A slow pan to the right, enough to show more of the corridor. I froze, pen hovering over the notebook. The system wasn't supposed to do that. I checked the cables, the labels, no alerts, no motion flags. I told myself it was a glitch and sat back down. Before the chair fully settled, I caught my reflection in the dark screen of a powered-off monitor beside me, and I felt it. Clear and heavy. The unmistakable sense that the room was aware of me in that moment. Not watching like a person watches, watching like something checking its work. After the camera adjusted itself on the third night, I did what I'd learned to do in jobs like that. I normalized it. I wrote it down, labeled it as a possible system error, and forced myself to keep watching the other screens. Fear only grows when you give it room. Logic is supposed to starve it out. The problem was the room didn't seem interested in my logic. A little after 3 in the morning, 2 exterior cameras froze at the exact same second. Both showed a parked truck near loading bay 4. Nothing unusual. What bothered me was the timestamp. Both feeds were exactly 3 minutes behind the wall clock. Not 2, not 4, 3. I stood up, checked what I could without rebooting anything. When I sat back down, the feeds were live again. No error message, no record of interruption. The radio crackled once, short, sharp, like someone checking if it still worked. I reached for it but didn't speak. The noise didn't come back. By the 4th night, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Some cameras only showed movement when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd catch it out of the corner of my eye. A shift. A blur. When I turned my head, the image was clean. Still. Almost smug. C-17 was worse. That corridor didn't appear on any map I'd been given. It was too narrow to be a loading area, too clean to be maintenance. The walls were smooth, light-colored, unmarked. At the far end, the hallway curved gently left, like it continued beyond the camera's reach. That night, the camera adjusted again, slowly, carefully. The corridor looked longer. A chill ran up my spine, slow and deep. I wrote it down with a shaking hand. Around 4, I heard a sound that didn't come from any speaker. A soft dragging noise, rubber against concrete, somewhere above the room. The entire complex was supposed to be empty. I checked every feed. Nothing. The sound stopped the moment I stood up. When I sat back down, it started again. I decided to step out and take a quick look. Grabbed the radio, moved toward the door. As my hand touched the handle, the radio crackled again. Longer this time. Under the static was something rhythmic, like breathing. Not loud, restrained, like whoever was doing it didn't want to be heard. "Control, this is Ethan," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Any activity on site?" Nothing but static. I opened the door and stepped into the sub-level corridor. Concrete walls, dim lights, normal, too normal. I turned back to close the door. The C-17 feed shifted the exact second the door clicked shut. The corridor was empty, but something new was there. A dark shape on the floor. Not a shadow cast by anything. Just a patch of darkness, deeper than it should have been, like light avoided it. I leaned closer to the screen. The shape didn't move, didn't pulse, it just existed. The air in the room felt heavier, warmer, like the ventilation had shut off. I wiped sweat from my face and checked the clocks. Wall clock, 4:17 a.m., C-17 timestamp, 4:20 a.m., 3 minutes. On the 5th night, I finally said something. Mark was there at the start of the shift. I told him about the delays, the camera, the corridor. He listened without interrupting, his eyes unfocused like he was already somewhere else. "That room's always had issues," he said. "That's why it's temporary." "Temporary how long?" I asked. He looked away. "A while." "And that camera," I pressed. "Does that hallway even exist?" He sighed, like I was pushing a conversation he'd already had too many times. "Just do the job," he said. "Stay in the room. Don't mess with the system. You're off that post next week." That was the first time anyone admitted no one stayed there long. That night, while I was logging events, I noticed the notebook wasn't open to the last page I'd written on. Someone had flipped back 2 pages. In faint pencil marks, barely pressed into the paper, was a sentence that wasn't mine. "She prefers when you watch." My first reaction was anger. I thought it was a joke, someone messing with me, but no one else had access to that room overnight. I knew that. I tore the page out and threw it away, stood there breathing hard, telling myself to get a grip. When I sat back down, every monitor was on, even the ones that usually stayed dark. For a few seconds that stretched far too long, every screen showed the same corridor. The one from C-17. At the far end, something moved. Slowly, like it was learning how. Then the feeds returned to normal, one by one, like eyelids closing. I sat there, heart pounding so hard it hurt, understanding one simple, terrifying truth. The room wasn't broken. It was working exactly as intended. After the night every monitor snapped to that same corridor, I seriously considered not going back. I sat in my car in the lot with the engine off, staring at the dark shape of the buildings like they might shift if I blinked. But fear doesn't cover rent. Fear doesn't pay off overdue bills, and I still had 2 more nights on that assignment. On the 6th night, the security room felt different the moment I walked in. Nothing had moved. The chair was where I'd left it, the notebook on the desk, the same flickering light overhead. But the air felt used, warm and stale, like somebody had been sitting there for hours before me, breathing it in and out. The C-17 monitor was off. That had never happened. I scanned the rest of the screens. Normal. No alerts, no warnings, no signal lost. Just that one black rectangle reflecting my face back at me, pale under fluorescent light. I stood there for a long second, waiting for it to come back. It did. Not with a flicker, not with static. It just switched on like a thought. The corridor was closer now. I can't explain it any other way. The angle was the same, but the perspective felt tighter, like the camera had been moved forward without anyone touching it. The turn at the far end was more defined. The light was brighter, almost clinical. No shadows, no corners for darkness to hide in. I checked the timestamp. Wall clock, 1:42 a.m. C-17, 1:45 a.m. 3 minutes. As the night went on, other cameras started showing the same delay, always 3 minutes ahead, never behind, like the system was trying to get somewhere before I did. Around 2:30, I stood up to stretch and felt a brief wave of dizziness, the kind you get after sitting too long in bad air. I took 2 steps toward the door, and that's when I heard it. A wet sound. Not electrical, not mechanical. Something soft, dragging against something rough, coming from the ventilation duct above the monitors. Slow, irregular, paired with what sounded like breathing held too close to the throat. "Hello?" I called out, instantly regretting it. The sound stopped. Every monitor in the room went black at once. Not a power outage. The lights stayed on. The hum was gone. The room felt suddenly too quiet, like it had been muffled. My heart started hammering. I grabbed for the radio, but my fingers didn't find it on my belt. I turned toward the door. The handle moved under my hand. Just slightly. Like someone on the other side had a grip on it too, steady but not forcing it. The radio crackled on the desk. I stared at it. I hadn't put it there. I didn't even remember dropping it. The static wasn't random. It pulsed. 3 sharp bursts. A pause. 3 again. Not a code I knew. Not a message. More like something practicing. Then the monitors came back, not to their usual feeds. Every screen showed that corridor, but from different angles. Some high, like mounted near a ceiling. Some low, like they were sitting on the floor. Some tilted, like they'd been knocked loose. At the far end of the hallway, something stood. It wasn't a person. Not the way a person fills space. It was too tall for the ceiling, bent in a way that shouldn't have been possible without pain, except it didn't look like it hurt. It looked like it was built that way. Its arms hung forward, too long, almost brushing the floor. The head, I didn't want to focus on it. Every time I tried, I felt pressure behind my eyes, like my body refused to let the image settle. The thing moved. Not toward me at first, toward the camera, toward the feed itself. The image rippled, like the screen was water, like something was pressing from the other side, testing the surface. The wet sound returned, louder now, not from the duct, but from everywhere. The room smelled like concrete after rain, like a basement that's been sealed for years. I stood up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. No, I said, but it came out thin like a whisper. The notebook pages flipped on their own. Slow at first, then faster, like somebody leafing through them with impatient fingers. They stopped on a blank page. A pencil line appeared. Not magically glowing, not dramatic, just pressed into paper like someone writing from the underside. You watch well. The door behind me clicked. Unlocked. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed the notebook like it mattered and lunged for the exit. The moment I hit the corridor outside, the air was colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. I ran. Down the sub-level hallway, up the stairwell, skipping steps, nearly falling. Somewhere behind me, I heard something that wasn't footsteps exactly, more like weight being rearranged, like something adjusting itself to follow. When I reached the ground level, the emergency lights flickered in a sequence that made the shadows look like they were moving on their own. I forced myself to look back once. On the stairs, between two landings where the light didn't reach, something was there, watching from above. Not with eyes, with attention. I shoved through the side exit and burst into the night air. The cold outside hit my lungs like water. I didn't stop running until my chest burned and my legs shook. Behind me, the entire complex went dark in one single breath, every light out at once. And I knew, standing there in the lot with my hands on my knees, trying not to throw up, that it wasn't over, not even close. Because that night didn't feel like an attack. It felt like a lesson. I went back on the 7th night for one reason, and I hate admitting it. I needed to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. I spent the whole day replaying everything, trying to file it under stress, lack of sleep, anxiety, anything that sounded like a normal human explanation. I told myself the cameras were old, the room was messing with my senses, the building was playing tricks. By the time I pulled into the lot, the sky was still barely holding on to the last bit of color. That should have helped. It didn't. The yard lights were on like always, but the place was too quiet. Not just empty. Quiet in a way that felt staged. No wind, no distant traffic, no insects. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, and then makes you feel like even that is too loud. The access door to the sub-level stairwell was unlocked. That alone made my stomach tighten. I went down slowly, one step at a time, hand sliding along the cold concrete wall. The metal door to the security room opened without resistance. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The chair slightly crooked, the notebook on the desk, the same fluorescent buzz, the same uneven flicker. Every monitor was off. For a few seconds, I stood there and considered walking away. I could have done it. No one was physically holding me there, but something in the room felt like expectation, like it was waiting to see what choice I made. I sat. The screens turned on all at once, not gradually, not one by one. Every monitor lit up simultaneously with the same image. The corridor. The C-17 corridor. But it wasn't just on one screen anymore. It wrapped around me, different angles of the same place, like the room was surrounding me with it. The light in the hallway was too bright, too clean. The far end was closer now, and the curve I'd always seen was gone. In its place was a wide opening, like a doorway into a larger space beyond the camera's reach. I checked the clocks. The wall clock had stopped. The second hand sat perfectly still, like it had been nailed in place. The camera timestamp was still 3 minutes ahead. My mouth went dry. I swallowed and tasted metal. Then the smell hit. Damp concrete. Rust. Something old that had been wet for too long and never dried. The temperature in the room dropped fast, the kind of cold that makes your joints stiff. My breath fogged faintly in front of my face. On the monitors, something moved at the far end of the corridor. It didn't step into view. It didn't enter dramatically. It simply separated itself from the space, like it had always been there, and I was only now being allowed to register it. Tall, bent, wrong. Its arms hung forward, longer than any human arms should be, and the way its body held itself looked like gravity didn't mean the same thing to it. I tried to look at what should have been its face, and felt a crushing pressure behind my eyes, like my own skull was rejecting the attempt. It began to move. Not toward me. toward the camera, toward the feed. The image warped, subtle at first like heat haze, then stronger, like a surface being pushed from the other side. The corridor looked like it was breathing, walls expanding and tightening in slow pulses. The radio on the desk crackled. Not random noise this time. Inside the static, something tried to shape words. It wasn't a voice exactly. It was an imitation of a voice. My voice. Or something trying to wear the edges of it. Is. It whispered, or almost whispered. The first half of my name stretched wrong, as if the syllables were being tasted. I stood up so hard the chair toppled backward. The door behind me slammed shut. The latch clicked. I rushed to it and grabbed the handle. It turned, but the door didn't budge, like someone was leaning against it on the other side with steady, patient weight. The monitor shifted again. The corridor was closer. The thing was closer, too. Its movements were less clumsy now, less searching, like it had practiced while I was gone. I backed away from the door and reached for the notebook with shaking hands. I don't know why. Maybe because paper felt real. Maybe because I needed something that wasn't a screen. The pages flipped by themselves. Not slowly this time. Fast, furious, like someone rifling through them in anger. They stopped on the first page, the one with the earliest entries from my first night. A pencil line pressed into the paper so hard the page bowed. Now you see. On the monitors, the thing tilted, as if reacting to that sentence being written. The distortion spread outward, bleeding into the edges of the screens. For a second, I saw my own reflection in the glass, and behind it, the corridor overlapped the room, like the hallway was trying to exist here. The pressure in the air became unbearable. My ears popped. My stomach lurched. Something inside me wanted to kneel, to go still, to stop resisting. The urge felt foreign, inserted, like a command sliding into my nerves. I forced myself to move. I threw my shoulder into the door once. Nothing. Again. The third hit shook something loose. The latch gave with a sharp metallic snap, and the door swung open so suddenly I nearly fell through it. I ran into the sublevel corridor. The lights there flickered in a frantic pattern. The shadows jumped. The walls felt closer, tighter, like the hallway was narrowing as I moved. Behind me, I heard that wet dragging sound again. Closer. Not hurried. Patient. I sprinted up the stairs, lungs burning, legs trembling, and didn't stop until I burst through the side exit into the open yard. The air outside was freezing, sharp enough to sting. I stumbled across the lot toward my car. Behind me, inside the building, something cracked. A single sharp sound like glass under pressure. And then the entire complex went dark. Not gradually. Instantly. Every light, every sign, every window. Black. I got in the car and started it with shaking hands. The engine turned over on the first try, like it wanted to help me. As I backed out, my headlights swept across the side of the building, and for the smallest fraction of a second, I thought I saw it. Not in the yard. Not outside. On the wall itself. In the place where shadow shouldn't have been. Like the corridor had pressed up against the surface of the world. Then the angle changed, and it was gone. I drove until I couldn't feel my fingers. And the worst part was this. It didn't feel like I'd escaped. It felt like I'd passed something. I didn't go back the next day. Or the day after. I spent 2 full days letting unknown numbers ring out, because I already knew what the call would be. Where are you? Why didn't you show? We need you to finish the week. And I didn't have an answer that would fit in a normal conversation without sounding like a man unraveling. On the 3rd day, Mark called from his personal phone. I picked up because some part of me still wanted him to say something that made the world click back into place. "Ethan," he said, voice flat, tired, "you disappeared." "I'm not coming back," I said. There was a silence on the line that felt too long to be casual. Like he wasn't surprised, like he was confirming a prediction. "All right," he said finally, "just drop off the badge." "No." He started to say my name again, then stopped, changed direction mid-thought. "Fine. I'll handle it. Just don't make a thing out of it. Tell them you're done. That's it." "You know," I said, and it wasn't even a question. He didn't answer right away. "I know the room has issues," he said, careful with the words. "It always has. That's why it's temporary." Temporary since when? A while, he repeated, same as before, and hung up. That week, I felt like I had the symptoms of an illness without the fever. No bruise, no cut, nothing visible. But my body behaved like it had survived something it didn't understand. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the certainty that someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. I'd turn the light on and find nothing. Then I'd spend the next hour listening to my own heartbeat like it was an intruder. The worst part was the smell. Sometimes, out of nowhere, I'd catch it in my apartment. Damp concrete, old moisture, a basement that never dried. I lived on the 3rd floor. My place was dry, clean. It didn't make sense. On Saturday afternoon, I went back to Ravenport. Not to work, not to prove anything, just to close the loop, turn in the badge, make it official, sever the connection. The industrial complex looked normal in daylight. Trucks, people, noise, a loud, busy world doing its best to convince me it was real. I parked near the main gate, walked up to the security office, and Mark met me outside with a clipboard. He took the badge without looking at my face for too long. "You good?" he asked, but it sounded like policy more than concern. "Yeah," I lied. He turned the badge over in his hand like it had weight. "They shut the room down," he said casually, like he was talking about a broken vending machine. My stomach dropped. "Why?" "Technical issues." He almost smiled when he said it, like the phrase was a joke only he understood. "They're moving the setup to a trailer outside. New equipment." I swallowed hard. "And C-17?" I asked. I hated that my voice shook on it. Mark's eyes snapped to mine. Quick, sharp, like I'd said something I wasn't supposed to say out loud. "There is no C-17, he said. "There never was." I felt heat rush to my face. "Yes, there was. I watched it. I logged it." He stepped a little closer and lowered his voice. "Ethan, you were there a week. You were exhausted. That system's a mess. Nobody's going digging through that, and you're not going digging through that." The way he said it wasn't advice. It was a warning. I left. Drove home with sweaty hands on the wheel, trying not to think. It worked for a few hours. Later that night, sitting on my couch, I remembered the notebook, the sentences, the pages turning, the pencil pushing into paper like someone writing from beneath reality. I needed to know if it had ever existed outside my head. The next day, Sunday, I drove back again. No badge, no check-in. I parked farther away and walked along the side fence until I reached the sub-level access door Mark had shown me on the first night. The metal door was still there, but now a thick chain ran across it and a new padlock gleamed in the sun. That's when something small, stupid, and final happened. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. No notification, no call, nothing. And then the camera app opened by itself, front-facing camera. My face filled the screen, pale in the daylight. I frowned and tried to close the app. It wouldn't close. I swiped again. Nothing. The screen brightness increased on its own, like someone was adjusting it. And then I saw it. Behind me, in the camera feed, there was a corridor that didn't belong there. Narrow, smooth, pale walls. Harsh white light. The same corridor from C-17. At the far end, a tall, bent shape stood completely still. I turned around instantly. There was nothing behind me but fence, weeds, and the side wall of a normal industrial building. A truck backed up somewhere in the distance. Reality kept making its normal noises. I looked back at the phone. The corridor was still there. And the shape wasn't at the far end anymore. It was closer. Not rushing, not lunging. Just nearer, like it had learned how to occupy distance. The screen flickered. For a split second, my reflection overlapped with something darker, like a shadow that didn't obey the angle of the sun. Then my phone powered off. Not the screen going black. Off. Dead. I pressed the button. Nothing. Held it down. Nothing. Like the battery had been removed. I stepped backward without meaning to. Then again, breathing shallow, throat tight, lungs refusing to fill all the way. I walked back to my car without looking at the complex again. That night, the phone worked like nothing happened. Battery full. No crash log, no app history, No record of the camera opening. I tried to convince myself it was a glitch. Heat, stress, a device bug. But something else started happening after that. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I'll see the little green indicator light on my phone, the one that means the camera is in use, even with every app closed, even with the phone face down. And every time it happens, the air in the room feels heavier, damp, like concrete that never dries, like a sealed basement being opened from the inside. I don't know what was in that security room. I don't know if the corridor was something trapped in the system, or if the system was just the easiest way for it to learn how to look. But I do know this. That week, I thought my job was watching. Now I understand I was just the shift. The room needed someone in the chair. And somewhere behind the screens, behind the 3-minute delay, behind the corridor that doesn't exist, there's something that still prefers when I watch. Because sometimes when the green light comes on and I can't stand it, I flip my phone over and open the front camera just to check. The app takes a little longer than it should to load. And in the reflection, for 1 second, I can tell the corridor got bigger.